Moral realism is the position that there are at least some facts about what matters. Facts about what matters, that's just another way of saying moral or ethical facts. So moral realism is the position that there are at least some moral or ethical facts. What matters is what matters, period. Not what matters to you or to her or to them or to us or to this specific group or that specific group. When you're talking about what matters to you or to somebody else, you're talking about your mental state, your beliefs about what matters or your likes. And those things are really important. They're just not what we're talking about here. When I say that moral realism is almost certainly true, what I'm saying is I cannot prove to you beyond all possible doubt that moral realism is true. I can prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that moral realism is true, but it's always possible that we've gotten some evidence wrong or we're being deceived in some systematic way. So the fact that evolution could possibly be misguided doesn't give us any reason not to study and perform research on evolution in the biology departments of the best universities in the world. It's the best confirmed theory in biology. Similarly, the fact that moral realism could possibly be false doesn't give us great reason to doubt its truth. And in fact, this is one of the very few things that most philosophers agree on, that moral realism is almost certainly true. So I'm not just teaching you something that I think, I'm teaching you something that there's a consensus about within philosophy. We'll talk about 2 bad arguments against moral realism and 7 good arguments in favor of moral realism. An argument within philosophy or logic or mathematics is not the same thing as arguing or having an argument out there in the world. If you have an argument with somebody out there in the world, you and that other person are yelling at each other, and maybe you're not going to be BFF anymore. If you are giving an argument in philosophy, then you are presenting a series of sentences that, when taken together, are supposed to be good evidence in favor of the truth of some other sentence. The sentences that are supposed to be evidence are known as the premises of the argument, and the sentence that those premises are supposed to be evidence for is known as the conclusion. So arguments have 2 parts: premises, which are the evidence; conclusion, which is the thing that that evidence is supposed to be evidence for. And yelling at each other doesn't work very well if you're presenting an argument in philosophy. You shouldn't think that since the word is shared between out there and in here, that it means the same thing. Here's the first argument that is against the truth of moral realism. So it denies that. It denies the position that there are at least some facts about what matters. 2 premises and the conclusion. First premise, people have beliefs about morality. True. Obviously true. I have beliefs about morality, so do all of you. Beliefs about what's good and bad, right and wrong, better and worse, just and unjust, fair and unfair. But, says premise 2, if somebody has a belief about something, X, then X, that thing that they have a belief about, is merely subjective or doesn't exist at all. Therefore, premises 1 and 2 together entail the conclusion: morality is merely subjective or doesn't exist at all. Another way of saying that is moral realism is false. This is not a great argument. To see why, let's take the form of that argument, the structure of it, out of the topic of morality and apply it to other things and see if it's good. So let's apply it to dogs. Premise 1, people have beliefs about dogs. Premise 2, if somebody has a belief about something, then that thing is merely subjective or doesn't exist. Conclusion, dogs are merely subjective or don't exist. No, dogs do exist. The beliefs about dogs are subjective, but the dogs themselves are not. So, put this way, This argument sounds bizarre, but we oftentimes hear people out there in the world say something like, well, you believe that, but that is merely your belief, or it's merely subjective, or that doesn't correspond with reality, or something like that. The mere fact that somebody believes something does not mean that what they believe that thing about doesn't exist. Might not. We have beliefs about things that don't exist, like beliefs about unicorns and Santa. But we have beliefs about things that do exist, like Colorado and people who dress up like Santa at malls. Argument 2, and you'll see that this is a similar sort of confusion. Premise 1, we disagree about what matters. True. We have big disagreements and small disagreements. We fight wars or lose friends or stop talking for a night over disagreements. It's obvious that we disagree about what matters. But, says premise 2, if we disagree about something, then there are no facts about that thing. Therefore, the conclusion is, there are no facts about what matters, that is, nothing matters. Again, not a great argument. To see why, do the same thing. Copy the argument's form onto something other than morality. So let's talk about God. We disagree about whether God exists. Yep. If we disagree about something, then there are no facts about that thing. Therefore, the conclusion is, there are no facts about whether God exists. That is, God neither exists nor doesn't exist. No, that doesn't sound right. And if you don't like the God example, let's give a science example. We disagree about which interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct. If we disagree about something, then there are no facts about that thing. Therefore, there are no facts about which interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct. That is, no interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct. That doesn't follow. Just because we disagree about something, that doesn't mean that there are no truths about that thing. So both of those arguments seem to confuse what's going on in people's heads with what's going on in reality. But beliefs are not the things that the beliefs are about. My belief about a dog is not a dog. My belief about morality is not morality. And similarly, conflicting beliefs about something doesn't show that there's any problem with morality. It shows that we have conflicting beliefs about something. Big deal. We should try to sort it out. Now let's look at 7 good arguments for moral realism. And 7's a lot, but the reason that I'm giving you 7, in addition to that I like all of these arguments, is that they all trade on or work because of a similar thing about us, or about how we interact with each other, or about how we move around reality. So you'll see these are all coming at the same issue from different angles. I'm trying to illuminate something about all of us, and I'm doing it from these different directions. Let's look first at the 2 arguments that correspond to the negative arguments. The first is what I call the positive argument from disagreement for moral realism. Premise 1, we disagree about what matters. Yes, we do. 2, disagreement presupposes something to disagree over. Let's give an example. Imagine that 2 people were disagreeing about whether God exists. And you said, hey, do you think there's a fact to the matter about whether God exists? He either does or doesn't. They said, no. It's unclear what they're doing when they're disagreeing. If I say God exists and you say God doesn't exist, then our disagreement with each other presupposes that there's a fact of the matter about whether he does or doesn't exist. So a presupposition of disagreement is that there's something to disagree over. Imagine me saying, I was disagreeing last night with a friend about whether it was Tuesday night or Wednesday night, but there's no fact of the matter about what night it is. You'd say, what the hell were you doing? Why were you disagreeing? In fact, that doesn't even look like disagreement. Premise 3, unless we are massively confused about reality and our relationship to it, our social practices at least sometimes indicate some things about reality. We live in reality. We have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in it, unless we're just massively confused. We're systematically deceived about reality, then we at least sometimes get things right about reality. And we're not massively confused about reality. Therefore, premises 1, 2, 3, and 4 entail some things actually do matter. Since we disagree about what matters, and disagreement presupposes the existence of something that matters, and we are not massively confused in our social practices, that shows that at least some things do, in fact, matter. Now, is it impossible that we are wrong about everything? No. That's why I've said that moral realism is almost certainly true. But notice how far into the realm of the bizarre you have to go in order to get out of this argument. You have to say that we are massively confused every time we disagree with somebody. Not just in terms of which person is right, but in terms of whether disagreement is a possible social activity at all. Let's look at the next one. The positive argument from moral belief about moral realism. We have beliefs about what matters. To believe that something matters is to believe that it actually matters. That's just what beliefs are. Imagine me saying, I believe that my students matter, but I don't believe that they actually matter. What? What am I talking about? Or, I believe that it's raining outside, but I don't think that it's actually raining. Or, I believe that it's Wednesday, but I don't think that it's actually Wednesday. You would think, I don't think Andrew knows what the word believe means. Because to believe is to believe that actually. And so if you believe that something matters, you believe that it actually matters. Now, unless we are massively confused again, the objects of our beliefs, the things we believe stuff about, at least sometimes exist. Unless you were massively confused, you would at least sometimes be thinking about things that do exist. Maybe you'd be thinking false things about those things, but you would at least be thinking about things that actually exist. So I have beliefs about what day it is. I have beliefs about my students. I have beliefs about where I live and who my parents are and what foods I like and what 2 + 2 equals. I have all of those beliefs. In order for the number 4 and my parents and the place that I live and days of the week not to exist, I would have to be very confused about pretty much everything that I was up to. But I'm not very confused about pretty much everything that I'm up to, and neither are you. Therefore, some things actually do matter. Now again, you can wiggle out of this, but you have to go really far into the realm of the bizarre and say, we are confused about almost everything. And notice that that's not just something that you can do with philosophy. You could do that with science, too. If someone didn't like the conclusions of our research into climate science, they could just say, yeah, but every time we look at the data about climate science, our eyes don't work right. Or every time we perform experiments that show such and such about chemistry, the equipment is breaking down. You could do that. That's possible that that's happening. Similarly, you could say every time we think anything or interact with anyone, we're just getting it wrong. Could say that, but it's improbable. But wait a minute, you might say at this point. Isn't tolerance a good thing? And tolerance requires us not to think that there are moral facts or facts about what matters, because if we did think there were moral facts or facts about what matters, that would require us to be intolerant of other people's differing positions. No, I say. In fact, if tolerance matters, that's also going to prove that moral realism is true. Now, an aside, I don't think that tolerance matters. I'm on record in videos and stuff arguing for the position that tolerance is often a bad thing. But a lot of people do think tolerance is a good thing. So if you think tolerance is a good thing, this argument will have some purchase for you. Anyway, if you think tolerance matters, then notice that you think something matters. So if it's important to be tolerant of people's differing beliefs about what matters, then There are things that are important. And if there are things that are important, then there are things that matter. And if there are things that matter, moral realism is true. So you can't assert the importance of being kind or tolerant to people with differing beliefs without asserting that people who say tolerance doesn't matter are just wrong. Let's look at the next one. Premise 1. We have made, or we could have made but didn't, or we can make in the future moral progress. Meaning, individually or collectively as a society or a nation or a world, we can get better, or we have gotten better, or we had opportunities to get better and we didn't, but it was possible to have gotten better. So for example, I imagine that most of you think that when the United States stopped legally promoting owning African people, that was a good thing. I agree with you. I imagine that most of you think that the passage of the 19th Amendment, which stopped denying women their moral right to vote, was a good thing. I agree with you. I imagine that most of you think that the Supreme Court's decision that found that gay couples have a constitutional right to marriage, was a good thing. I agree with you. But notice that even if you think any of those things were bad things, we should still be able to own African people. Even if you think that, then you think that progress was possible, it just didn't happen. Many of you statistically think the election of the current president was a bad thing. Some of you think it was a good thing. For those of you who think it was a good thing, you think we made moral progress. For those of you who think it was a bad thing, you think we had the opportunity for moral progress, but we didn't take it. But that possibility or actuality of moral progress requires that some things actually do matter. Wait, why? Because to progress towards something requires the existence of the thing that you're progressing towards. You can't make progress towards something that doesn't exist. Imagine that I said I was making progress towards discovering the largest prime number. No, I am not. There is no such thing. I am not making any progress towards discovering it. Or, I'm making progress towards getting Santa to respond to my letters. No, I am not. That will never happen. I'm not making progress towards it. Or I'm making progress towards getting to Narnia. No, I'm not. I might believe I am, but I'm not. It doesn't exist. Now, I almost never have a problem convincing my students of color and women and members of the LGBTQ community and anybody who's part of a group that has historically been subjugated that this is a real good argument. Occasionally I have straight white Christian men who are like, I don't know, everything's pretty much been the same all the time. But I don't think that's any of you. That is to say, it's a lot easier to recognize that we made progress if you are a member of a group that has been on the ground concretely affected by that progress. Clearly. It's not to say white men are deficient in some way. Let's look at the next one. We use reasons to move around the world in practical terms. Yes, you all manage to get here. You all manage most of the time not to get hit by buses. But, number two, we could only use reasons to move around the world in practical terms if those reasons were accurate. You can't just use inaccurate reasons about where things are positioned in the world and be successful. Every once in a while, you might end up being lucky. Like if you manage to get a map that is so bad that the wrong road gets you to the right place. But most of the time, if you're using inaccurate reasons about where you ought to go in order to get to where you're trying to be, you're going to end up in the wrong place. But the accuracy of reasons presupposes that some practical moves matter more than others. If I'm trying to get out of this room, the practical move, and by that I just mean physical movement, of going that way, or I guess out the window, but I don't know if I could do that. matters, is better factually than just continuing to walk in that direction, into the corner where there's no door or window. If you came into the room and saw me doing that and said, hey, what's up? Then, when I told you I'm trying to get out of the room, you would be correct, objectively, in saying, oh, that's not the way you get out of the room, it's over there. That's not just like your mere preference. It's a fact that it's better to go that way to get out of the room than to go this way to get out of the room. And so, if the accuracy of reasons presupposes that some practical moves are matter more than others do, and we know that some reasons are accurate, then some practical moves do in fact matter more than others do, which means some things actually do matter. I like this one a lot because it's so concretely evident to us. When you look around the world is structured, at least quite a bit of it, in terms of possible moves that you can make in the world. You see, when you see the corner of the room, that it is not the way to go. You don't even have to consciously reason about it. You see it as not the way to go. And if something is on fire, you see it as something to get away from. Let's look at the next one. The argument from intellectual success for moral realism. We use reasons to think about the world in intellectual terms. So, for example, I know that Pepper is a cat, and I know that all cats are mammals. Let me use my reason brain. I know that Pepper is a mammal. I used reasons. And you all used reasons when you thought about that and thought, yeah, that's right, he nailed it. Even if you thought that I got that wrong, you would think that I got it wrong because you used reasons. So you're never not using reasons when you're evaluating reasoning. But we could only use reasons to think about the world in intellectual terms if those reasons were accurate. So I can't get to Pepper is a mammal by using inaccurate reasons. Now, again, maybe every once in a while I reason so poorly that I end up with the correct answer. But most of the time, intellectual success, meaning thinking good, requires reasons that are accurate about the thing that you're thinking about. But if there are such things as accurate reasons, then that means that some reasons matter more to certain intellectual processes than others do. Thinking correctly about cats and mammals, and Pepper being a cat, therefore she's a mammal, there are some intellectual moves there that matter more than other ones do. If I went from Pepper is a cat and all cats are mammals to Pepper is an alligator, I picked the wrong intellectual reason. Wrong in terms of what? Wrong in terms of its mattering to the process that I'm engaged in. Therefore, some intellectual moves matter more than others do. Conclusion, some things actually do matter. Let's look at the next one. Premise 1. We act as though things matter a lot. We care about things. Even if we try to pretend that we don't care about things, we care about pretending that we don't care about things. Find yourself someone who claims to be a nihilist and watch how vociferously and loudly they defend nihilism. What the hell are you doing? If you're a nihilist, just lie there and starve to death. Anyone who's really a nihilist dies quickly. Because why breathe? Why eat? If there are no reasons, then there are no reasons. Hare talks about a student who he had who really badly misread Camus' The Stranger and thought that it was an argument in favor of nihilism. It's not. I'm sure you all had acceptable enough teachers when you read that book, if you've read it, to recognize that our main character is not supposed to be a hero. He's supposed to be a cautionary tale. He's gross and awful. Anyway, the student that Hare has misreads The Stranger and starts running around loudly yelling about how nothing matters, and Hare goes, this is weird. Weird why? Because why yell about nothing mattering if nothing matters? Now, unless we're massively confused, if we act as though things matter, then at least some things actually do matter. Now, again, we might just be systematically deceived, but insofar as we're not, we're at least occasionally getting it right about things mattering. That doesn't mean we're getting it right about what matters. We might be totally confused about what matters. We're not massively confused, therefore, some things actually do matter. So you'll notice that I've come at that conclusion that some things do in fact matter from a whole bunch of directions, but using the same evidence. The evidence is in terms of how we interact with the world, the sorts of lives we live as humans, how we interact with each other, what we think is valuable, whether we think anything is valuable at all. So it's our manifest lived experience that counts as the evidence in favor of the position of moral realism. And so in order to deny the position of moral realism, you have to deny our manifest lived experience. You have to find some good reason to think that everything that appears to us is just wrong. But even if you found some reason to think that, you would have found a reason, and then you'd be a moral realist again. Notice how the way that we're talking about moral realism is so broad that no religion or cult or self-help community or merely insular way of doing things could lay claim to the entirety of morality. I think one of the things that makes people nervous about morality is that they've heard some person or some group that they're not too fond of yell a lot about morality and use their yelling to beat people down, and so they think, well, I don't like beating people down, therefore there must be something wrong with morality. But we can use good tools to do bad things, and so the fact that some bad people use the concept of morality to beat up on people doesn't mean that we need to give up on morality. In fact, it means that we need to get really clear on what morality is so that we can show those people why they're wrong about it.